G'day guys, welcome back to the Boundary Riders Podcast. Today we're up to episode 25, which is, halfway there to 50. And what a massive round we saw in round 23. We obviously saw Hawthorn nearly get there against Melbourne, but Melbourne were able to grind that one out in the end today. We saw Port Adelaide be able to continue their form and keep their top two hopes alive. The Brisbane earlier in the round beat Collingwood. And what we're going to start off with today is, of course, the Swans and the Crows game. Now, you can see here, Swans fan, I'm sure there'll be maybe a few of you who join the podcast today, and if you are, welcome. This is going to be 100% my opinion on how that decision came to light, and if I believe it was the right call, and I think the umpire was in the perfect position, and I can't even lie, that was 100% a goal. I've looked at it. Last night, I was looking at it thinking maybe there was a way it hit the post, and we just didn't get a frame of it. But that was a goal to the Crows. They got robbed of that goal and potentially lost 4 points. And the reason why I say potentially is there was still 80 seconds to go. There's no way of knowing if Sydney were going to get a clearance, get the ball forward and kick a point, make it a draw, or kick a goal and win the game back. So I understand why the AFL have not made that decision to reverse the scores. I would have been interested to see if they would have reversed the scores if it was the last kick of the game, if it was like on the siren from Ben Keays. That would have actually been quite interesting. But with 80 seconds to go, there's still so many variables. They can't overturn the decision. And, I mean, it's very disappointing for the Crows that they can't do much about it. But again, this is just another, score review blunder that, the system is wrong. And I know that the system would have changed that decision, but in the end of the day, there should have been the system as a whole, even the way that it was handled is wrong. It's been wrong for a long time. It takes too long. So there's not just, it needs a complete overhaul at the end of the season. The technology needs to be improved drastically, as we saw last week with the Carlton-Melbourne game, and it needs to be done a lot better in the game itself and how it's dealt with from the umpires on field. I think that this is almost well overdue, that this needs to be improved by the AFL. They've not put enough money into it, and they can say till the cows come home that they put a lot of money into it. Well, you didn't use it in one of the biggest times that has cost potentially a team a final spot. I'm not going to say that it did cost the Crows a final spot, because even if the Crows went against West Coast, which, let's be honest, I mean, I know we'll talk about the West Coast Eagles a little bit later, but they were going to beat them. But the thing is, GWS, Bulldogs, and Sydney, I mean, they all could still have won next week, and it won't make a difference. We'll obviously see what happens, and the Crows wouldn't have made the finals anyway. We'll talk a little bit more about the game itself from the Swans, but basically that was just a huge blunder from the AFL. The apology from Gillon McLachlan means jack shit for Crows fans. And to be honest, as a Swans fan at the end of that game, it was a pretty hollow feeling. I'm glad that the Swans have now made the finals, but it's not exactly the way I wanted to see it happen. You want to win on 100% fair points, and I mean, the Crows very well may have stolen that game from the Swans, and how the Swans played in that last quarter, they probably deserved it. But at the end of the day, the AFL, the thing is, you can't change the decision now, and I know it's hard for me to say that without a little bit of a biased thought, but there were still so many variables in that game, and there's so many variables with 80 seconds to go. I know the Swans didn't kick a score in those 80 seconds, but it's a lot different starting the ball in the middle of the ground with a 6-6-6 than starting the ball at fullback, kicking the ball down the line. So, I don't know. I think it's very... I just feel sorry for the Crows fans. I feel quite sorry for the Swans as well. I don't think that the Swans... I don't think it was rigged by any fucking means. I don't know why people would think it's rigged. I mean, the Swans aren't exactly protected by the AFL, I'm going to be honest with you. They took away their money supplement that they needed for people because Sydney is a fucking expensive place to live in because of that. And they're not exactly winning free kick counts every single week. It's not like there's a couple of other teams in the competition that win them every single week. Bulldogs! But I just think it's a bit crap. It's crap on all sides. And look, I think it's pretty... I'm going to be honest with you. I think it's a little bit unfair that the umpire has been let go. I know that People will say otherwise, and he should be sacked for life. I understand their opinion. But there's been so many umpiring decisions this year. Why does this guy have to suffer because of one mistake that he made, when we have seen multiple mistakes per game, per quarter, every single game this season? And because this guy has, he's done it definitely at the wrong time, but he's made a human error, as what Gillon McLaughlin was saying. Why aren't we... They're not picking umpires on form. They're not picking them because we see the same umpires in every single week, and they're not getting any better. So why do we have to take all our blame on this one guy? I mean, I feel quite sorry for the guy, to be honest. He's obviously, in the heat of the moment, made the wrong call, but I'm sure a lot of us would have made that. I'm sure there would be a lot of us out there who's made some pretty bad calls in our lifetime, and it's unfortunate this happened to him there. But I don't think he deserves to take the brunt of the pain from the umpiring, how it's been atrocious a lot of the time this season. We've seen umpire dissent thrown away, then brought back. We've seen umpiring decisions come back and come forward. I think it's crap that he's taking the brunt of it. We've seen so many, even players, even this week with the Boundary. Like, it was the game against Melbourne and Hawthorn today, which I'm recording this on a Sunday, that was completely out of bounds, and it wasn't even called. Number one, at the end of the year, AFL need to look at the score review, and I think they will, because I think they will want to save face, and the umpiring needs to be looked into review. I'm tired of the AFL having to come out every single week and either defend a decision or come out and apologise for a wrong decision when I don't think there's any sport in the world that has to have an umpiring department or a league come out every single week and say, we are sorry for your decision, or we back the umpires. That's crap, and it needs to be fixed immediately. But I don't know if it will happen until the end of the season. You can't change rules three quarters of the way through, so they won't be able to. But at season's end, it needs to be seriously looked at, because I would not be the only one out there who believes that the umpiring this year has been below par, to say the least. But, of course, we will move on now, and we will get into the review of round 23. And as you guys know, we always go through the votes of every single game. And at the end of the year, probably in the week of the bye for the finals, we'll be doing a live countdown of every single vote so far, and the winner will be getting the Riders medal, of course. Now, I know that's a big deal. And also, we'll be taking home, not Charlie, because who gives a fuck about the Brownlow. It's all about the Rider medal. Who's taking home Rider? So, I'm just jacking off myself at this point. But anyway, of course, at the start of round 23, we had 1v2, Collingwood v Brisbane at Marvel Stadium. And I think it's really funny that Collingwood are sitting there whinging about playing at Marvel Stadium when you play 15 of your games in the season in Melbourne. So get over yourself, Eddie, you wanker. But anyway, the Lions went to Marvel Stadium, have a pretty good record over there, and in a shootout, there was 34 goals kicked. They won. And good on Brisbane for winning that game. They are probably in the best form out of the top 4 teams at the moment. And I think they're going to be pretty hard to beat, because at this stage, I know they have choked a few times having finals at the Gabba. But I think this could be a bit different this year. We will see as the next couple of weeks roll on. They've got St Kilda next week, which will be a big game for them. But with the votes, we got 3 votes, Lachie Neale, 2 votes, Charlie Cameron, and the 1 vote, Scott Pendlebury. So that were my votes for that game. And I'm also thinking next year, when we do the votes as well, to try and give... Because I know a lot of them can be decided on midfielders because they do get a lot of the possessions. I'm thinking of next year maybe giving a bonus point to maybe a key forward and a key defender. To maybe, liven up the points and see maybe if a key defender or something could get more points. Because maybe, I don't know. Let's just say... Brennan Cox. I don't remember why Brennan Cox, of all people, came to my mind. But anyway, for Fremantle, let's say he has a really good game, has 30-odd touches, and he gets the 3 votes. He could potentially get 4 votes for, having a really good game in defensive half. And it's not going to be very often that he gets a lot of votes. So, give him an extra bonus point, and maybe that could give him some extra points going into the end of the season. And then, gives a little bit more of a chance for a key position player to then win the medal next year. I think that should be a pretty cool idea, but if you guys want to let me know down in the comment section. But anyway, we'll go to the next game, which is Richmond versus North Melbourne at the MCG. Richmond farewelling some of their premiership heroes in Trent Cotchin and Jack Riewoldt. Jack Greenwood, I remember kicking one of the shots for goal and completely mucked it up and missed everything. But he did kick one in the end. That was good to see for Richmond. And they were able to pull off a massive win, for those fairly welling their heroes. I will say as well that recently the news came out that Jack Zeeble got coward punched at a bar or something after that game, and he was also being farewelled with retirement, and that's just fucking cowardly and bullshit. Fuck whoever punched him, and I don't know why you would anyway. It's not like Jack Zeeble did much. I don't think he did anything in that game. It was like untoward or anything, and it sounds like it was an unprovoked attack, so fuck that person to the moon, you dog. But anyway, hopefully he's all good. I think the latest update is he's going through... he could have to do some facial surgery, so I hope everything goes well with him. But in the meantime, we'll get to the votes now. The 3 votes went to Shea Bolton, 2 votes to Dustin Martin, and the 1 vote to Nick Larkey. I'm going to say it. Nick Larkey, I think, is one of the best key forwards in the comp, and it's so unfortunate that he's playing for such a ravel of a team in North Melbourne, who are now bottom of the ladder, and are not even against a team like West Coast, who are one of the worst teams we've seen in 15 plus years, basically since Fitzroy or whatever. Embarrassing for North Melbourne, honestly. To not even have a worse season as West Coast, to be below them on the ladder is freaking deplorable. But Nick Larkey is one of the shining lights, and he wins the best and fairest for them by a country mile. After that, though, we get to a near upset, which was the Gold Coast versus Carlton in the Gold Coast at Heritage Bank Stadium. They were pretty close to losing this one, Carlton. The Gold Coast Suns had a blistering start, but they got pegged back throughout the rest of the afternoon, and in the end, Carlton got away with a big win here, secure their spot in the 8, which was basically already secured anyway. Unfortunately, won't have a chance to push late for that top 4 because Melbourne win today. But Carlton go into the finals now in red-hot form, and with the game against the Giants next week, which will be a decider probably, which could be a decider for the Giants if they make the A. Massive game for them next week. But I did say at the start of the season that Carlton would make the 8. I didn't think they'd make it like this, but you got to give credit to Michael Voss and his team. They've done very well. And led by the person who got the 3 votes in this game was Charlie Curnow. Maybe not kicked as many goals as we've seen this season, but definitely led from the front and is one of the best players in the comp at the moment, if not, this season, really. He may not get... I know he probably won't poll a lot of Brownlow votes. He'll probably poll a few, especially those games against West Coast, but he's doing everything he can to get Carlton over the line, and he did it basically on his own back in this one. He got the 3 votes. 2 votes to David Swallow, who kicked... was it 3 or 4 goals, I think it was, from half forward. So he's definitely, kept his career going, being able to move half to half forward and then give these younger midfielders an opportunity, which is really good to see. And the 1 vote went to George Hewitt. After that, we get to the Giants versus the Bombers, and what a fucking raffle the Bombers have turned into. We thought St Kilda were going to go into free fall, but the Bombers have done everything they could to go straight down to the earth and plummet right down the ladder. 126-point loss to the Bombers, and the Giants have recorded their biggest ever win in club history, which is great to see. And they have their spot in the 8 at the moment. They'll have to see if the Bulldogs... They have their opportunity in their own hands, but if the Bulldogs can somehow beat Geelong next week down in Geelong, that Sunday game is massive. So we'll see how that goes. For the theatre, we'd love to see the Bulldogs win next week and then give the Giants every chance. But I think at this stage that the Giants deserve to make finals way more than the Bulldogs. But we'll talk more about this game. This was, from the outset, a Giants win. The Bombers didn't show up. You can see a lot of replays in this game that they just weren't chasing hard enough. They kind of thought that their season was over, which is kind of strange because if they win this game, the Bombers, they are right in the box seat to make the 8 because it means the Bulldogs have some fighting. I think that actually they wouldn't be in the 8. The Bulldogs would still be, I believe, on percentage, but it would give the Bombers every single chance next week to, maybe cause an upset against Collingwood, who won in the best of form, and potentially give themselves a finals berth, which, they did everything they could to avoid that this season, which I did love a meme that I saw that said, you can't lose the finals, you can't lose a final if you don't make it, and I think that's pretty funny considering they only kicked 5 goals in this game and Kyle Langford kicked 2 of them, who has definitely been a shining light this year, and if it wasn't for Zach Merritt's really good form this year, he'd be winning the best and fairest at Essendon, in my opinion. And I think he should be second because I think he's been brilliant, Kyle Langford. But nonetheless, the hero of this game was Jesse Hogan. Kicked 9 goals, career high for him, and he's had a really good year for the Giants. It may not be looking on the goals tally that he's had a huge bag for a year, but 9 goals against any team is massive. And I mean, Jesse Hogan, a couple of years ago, his career was at a crossroads. He was playing for Fremantle, was injured all the time, decided to move his career down to the Giants, and he's flourished up there, down there, or across from Fremantle. But he's done very well, Jesse Hogan. So, of course, he got the 3 votes. 2 votes went to Tom Green, and the 1 vote went to Lockie Whitfield. After that, we get to the Saints versus the Cats, and the Saints, surprisingly, have locked in a final spot, and Geelong, the reigning premiers, have plummeted right down the ladder and will not play finals. This quite surprised me. I thought the St Kilda were going to plummet right out of the 8, but I mean, they banked their wins early and they're able to hold on to that top 8 spot. And if they can, pull a win next week against the Brisbane Lions, they hold a home final in the first week of, finals of the finals in 2023, which is massive considering, a lot of the people wouldn't have thought that the Saints would have been anywhere near this in 2023. But Ross Lyon's been able to build this team. They have found some stars, some young stars in Owens. We've seen Wanganeen Malira play brilliantly this year. Max King's came back and had an impact. Jack Sinclair's been brilliant in the midfield. And a player who's definitely been unheralded, probably until the last month, is Rowan Marshall. He was massive in this game. He, of course, got the 3 votes. And he has definitely made a late charge for an All-Australian spot. It's going to be hard because I think Tim English has just had an overall great year. And Kieran Briggs has probably been, the best ruckman of the past 6 or 7 weeks. But Rowan Marshall's just snuck along playing his footy at St Kilda and being brilliant for the all year, and it's been great to see for him. I think he was brought up in New Zealand, which is quite interesting. But he's came to St Kilda and he's made a career for himself. Good on him, and he definitely deserves the 3 votes in this one. 2 votes to Jack Sinclair and the 1 vote to Jack Steele. I will say for the Cats though, they need to hit the off-season running. They need to be hitting for players with some pace, and they need to find some midfield depth because Dangerfield, I don't think, lasts much longer. They've got the only players who are really performing for them at the moment are their older players like Tom Hawkins and Jeremy Cameron. I don't know who's going to be able to lift for them as the young group. I guess Ollie Henry's been okay, but again, their defenders have definitely dropped off. Tom Stewart has had a pretty good year, but again, he's getting quite old. He's getting older as well. Will they be able to stand up next year with some injuries back? A lot of the injuries to their players, though, are for older players. So the question still remains if they can rebuild. I mean, you can't write off the Geelong for if they can bounce back next year. I mean, you'd be stupid to, but I mean, maybe Kane Corns is right about saying it's an end of an era. It did look like a pretty poor performance, and they've had a pretty poor year. I think everyone just expected that they would bounce back, and they just have not been able to. That we thought maybe when they drew to Sydney that there could be like a big bounce back for them, and they just haven't been able to. And I mean, to be honest, for a team, they've done the Bulldogs sort of move from 2016 to 2017. They've had the hangover and they've not been able to bounce back. And we'll move to the next game now. The team who everyone thought was going to plummet right down the ladder, who really did until about 6 weeks ago, have bounced into the finals and have done better off a massive loss in a grand final to hit it, which are the Sydney Swans. Now, look, for 3 quarters, Sydney had a massive lead, and they were playing a much better brand of footy, and the Crows didn't look like they showed up, which was really disappointing because I was thinking this game was going to be a pretty big game, and, until 3/4 time, I thought, wow, this is pretty poor from the Crows. The Swans are doing really well, and they're just going to be able to hope we'll be able to win this game. But the Swans have been have had a knack this year of having a good lead or having a good moments in games and just letting it all slip straight out, and that's what they did in this game. The Crows, they kicked 1 point in the last quarter, Sydney, and the Crows kicked 5 goals. No, not 5 goals. I think they kicked 4 goals, 7 or something in the last quarter. No, that wouldn't be right. They did definitely kick 5 goals, something. I mean, it was 4 goals. It doesn't really matter. They did have a massive comeback. It was 32 points at three-quarter time, which it was at half-time as well. So for people who are saying that the Crows caught back in the third quarter, I don't know about that. But anyway, they had a massive last quarter. It started with Lockie Murphy kicking the first goal of the last quarter. They were coming hard. But, I'm sorry, they didn't convert again. They had a lot of opportunities, the Crows, to beat the Swans before that Ben Keays kick. They had a lot of opportunities. Taylor Walker missed a sitter. Darcy Fogarty missed a sitter. Lockie Murphy missed everything. These guys are, paid the bucks to kick the goals for the Crows, and they didn't. And for the Swans, looks like Tom Papley could be injured, which is big. Tom McCartan has been suspended for 2 weeks, which he deserves. That was not a very good look. So he'll miss next week. He'll miss the first final, and probably misses. I don't know if Sydney can win the first final. We'll see who they play. But yeah, I'm not going to talk about your post because we talked that earlier. I'm talking about the game itself, and it was a very good finish to the game. Now we get to the votes. 3 votes went to Nick Blakey. He may not be doing a lot of the disposals, but as we know on this channel, the votes don't just go to the people who get the most amount of touches. It's for the influence. It's for the big moments. And Nick Blakey in that last quarter, I think, was probably the big difference in the Crows not winning this game. I know the post, okay, but Nick Blakey was massive coming off halfback, had some big moments in that last quarter, and I don't think he'll make an All-Australian spot. He may get into the 40, but he has been very good off that half-back line this year, and also has had to play tall a lot this year as well. So I gave huge props to Nick Blakey, and he got my 3 votes. 2 votes went to Isaac Heaney. He was massive in the first 3 quarters and really set the tone for the Swans. Had a really tough start to the year. Probably playing injured, in my opinion. And definitely didn't hit the heights of last season. But in the past 6 weeks in this winning form for the Swans, he's definitely bounced back. And he was massive with the 2 votes. And the 1 vote, I was very torn here. It was between Rory Laird and Errol Goulden. And the reason why I have gone with Errol Goulden is because I support the Swans. No, it's not. The reason why I picked Errol Goulden is because I think Rory Laird was very good in the last quarter, but I feel like Errol Goulden overall had a pretty good game, which is why I gave it to Errol Goulden. Now, people have a go at me for that. I understand. I try to be as unbiased as possible in these things, and I think I'm pretty good at it. Hopefully people understand that. And I think there's been a lot of times this year where I haven't given Swans votes, especially in those losing slumps. But we'll move on to the upset of the season, and I know it's the Bulldogs, so they're not exactly the most touted team in the comp. But to lose to the West Coast Eagles of all teams, you should be embarrassed, Western Bulldogs and Luke Beveridge. I can't believe that... I'm going to be honest, I don't think he should survive his job this year after that performance. They were terrible against the Eagles. There were times in that last quarter when, I don't know, everyone would have thought they're just going to lose this game, the Eagles. They did it against they did it against Essendon, and they did it against, Jesus. There's another team they did it against. I can't remember. And they also just beat North Melbourne after they nearly lost it. But the Bulldogs just didn't show up. Marcus Bontempelli did all he could to try and get him over the line, but he couldn't. And to West Coast credit, they were very good. And it shows that maybe there's something they could grab out of this season and not finish bottom, which I don't know. I think it's pretty... I will say, I know people may have a go at Adam Simpson for, saying what he said at the end of the game. If you don't know what he said, he basically said, I tried to tank the last quarter, but I couldn't. Unfortunately, our boys got over the line. I thought that was fucking hilarious. I've got to give him credit for that. To be honest, I thought maybe he was going to try and tank it. I thought he was. But the Bulldogs couldn't win the game. They were that bad. I thought it was pretty funny. I don't know if he survives. I don't think he should survive. I think they've had a terrible year, the West Coast Eagles, and I think they need to change. But, to give him a little bit of credit, they were able to pull off a big win here, the West Coast Eagles, get themselves off the bottom of the ladder, which is amazing for them. And the Bulldogs, I don't think Luke Beveridge should survive this, to be honest. He has... I don't want to quote Kane Corns too much, but they have the list to win a premiership and honestly bring a dynasty to the club, and he's just wasting it. They have one of the best midfield lists in the comp. They've got one of the best, they've got the 2 best, I think one of the best combinations of forwards for the next 5-10 years in Norton and Ugle Hagen. I don't know why they picked up Rory Lowe. I think that was a waste. They've got one of the best ruckmen in the comp, and if they can pick up a defender in the next few years, I think they could definitely push for a spot. But I don't think they can with Louis Beveridge. They just don't have... Ever since 2016, it just doesn't look like he has the method to get them there. I know in 2021, he got them to a grand final. But ever since then, they've been right down. And I don't know if... I think he will survive this because it's one loss. And people can just say, oh, it's only one loss. It's only one performance. Everyone has it. But I'm going to be honest. I don't know if he should. But anyway, we get to the votes of this one. I gave the 3 votes to Tim Kelly. He was massive. Great game from him. And he's probably been their best player this year for West Coast. Probably Oscar Allen. He's probably been second best, to be honest. But he's been very good this year, Tim Kelly, when he's, I won't say very... Actually, he's not very good because they've lost a lot of games. But he's been good for the standard of the West Coast Eagles. Let's just say that. I don't know why I did that. But anyway, Bontempelli got the 2 votes. He did everything he could to drag them over the line. He just couldn't in the end. And it's pretty unfortunate because, let's be honest, if they win this game, I'll probably give him the 3 votes. But I think that Tim Kelly in that last quarter had some moments that just got his team over the line, which is why I gave him the 3. And the 1 vote, surprisingly, to a player who I thought maybe was at the end of his career. Jamie Cripps got another 5 goals, and he's done that a few times this year. So you've got to give him credit for that. As a small forward, especially in a team like the West Coast Eagles, he's actually had some good moments this year, which is really good to see. So I gave him the 1 vote. After that, we get to Melbourne versus Hawthorn, and Hawthorn did everything they could to nearly stop this game against Melbourne. They were able to... Finn McGuinness in the first 3 quarters was able to hold Clinton Oliver to 10 touches. I think that's really good to see of a tagger, and I've seen a couple of clubs trying to impose a tagger in the past few weeks. In Saturday night, Callum Mills was able to tag Jordan Dawson pretty well out of that game. We've seen a few others. I think Willem Drew's done it a few times this year. So it was really good to see from Hawthorn do that against Clayton Oliver. But Melbourne, late in the last quarter, were just able to pull away. They kicked, I think, 4 of the past 5 goals and just were able to keep Hawthorn at bay. I think Hawthorn lost Jai Newcomb just before the match. So that was really a tough loss for them in the clearances. The guy who came in, the debutant, Hurstwaite, I believe, had a pretty good game, kicked a couple of goals. But who I want to give special credit to is someone who... A bit controversial for Melbourne fans, I guess, because he's been kind of in that team for a while now, kind of in the 26. But he's kind of shone since the loss of Bailey Fritsch, and that's Jake Melksham. Massive game from him. If he kicked straight, he could have kicked an absolute bag. He kicked 3 goals for Jake Melksham, and I think he kicked 4 behinds before he kicked the goal. So I guess he kind of straightened up in the end, but nonetheless, I think he was massive in this game, which is why I gave him the 3 votes, and... He's arguably been their best forward in the past 6 weeks, Jake Melksham, which is kind of surprising to see. It was really good to see as well that Melbourne didn't rely on Clayton Oliver or Christian Petrarca to win this game. Jack Viney was brilliant as well and was unlucky to miss the votes here, in my opinion. But, Jake Melksham was massive for Melbourne and, I think got him over the line in a lot of states in this one. 2 votes in the end went to James Worpel. God, how the hell did I forget that? And the 1 vote went to Kyle Amon, who has been very good in the past few weeks for Hawthorn. And finally, we get to the final game of the round, which was Fremantle versus Port Adelaide. And Fremantle just stuck around for most of this one. Port Adelaide were able to win this game. Held off Freo by 16 points. And keep their top 2 hopes alive. If St Kilda are somehow able to pull a big victory at the end of this against Brisbane... Port Adelaide, if they beat Richmond on Sunday next week, will be able to jump into second spot and get a home final, which would be massive for Port Adelaide. But obviously their opportunity isn't in their hands. But I think Port fans would love that home final in the first part of the season. Nonetheless, Zach Butters led from the front for Port Adelaide was massive, and I don't think he'll win the Brownlow this year, and the only reason why I say that is there was about a 5-week period where he's not going to get any votes for Port. A lot of them are with the losses in a row that they had, but I think Butters is going to struggle in about a 5-week period, so that's why he probably won't win the Brownlow, but he's been massive for Port this year, and he'll definitely be All-Australian midfield. He's been really good, and Port Adelaide got a 10-year midfield there, right, with him, Jason Horne-Francis, Rosie, just building that midfield brilliantly. Of course, Zach Butters got the 3 votes. The 2 votes went to Luke Ryan, who will be the halfback, All-Australian this year. He's been really good. And the 1 vote I gave to Andrew Brayshaw. But yeah, guys, that is the review of round 23. With 1 round to go, it's going to be massive. And after that, of course, we get to the tips for round 24. So we start off round 24, final round of the season, with Collingwood up against Essendon. And if this was about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I'd honestly give Essendon a bit of a chance here with the Collingwood poor form. well, I mean, guess 5 weeks ago, Collingwood's form was immense. So if I was giving Essendon's 5 weeks ago against Collingwood's form now, I'd give Essendon a real chance. But I think Collingwood, even though they're not in the best of form themselves, I think they've got the quality that they need to be able to beat Essendon, and pretty comfortably, I believe. I think Essendon will bounce back and probably have a pretty good maybe first quarter or two. But after that, I think Collingwood would be good and too good in the end to just bounce back and beat Essendon pretty easily, secure that top spot, which they actually don't have at the moment. If they were to lose this game and Brisbane win, then Brisbane could surprisingly take the top spot, which would be really interesting. But I think Collingwood would be too good in this one, and they'll win this one pretty easily. Next up, we have Saturday afternoon, North Melbourne versus Gold Coast, down in Tassie, which is a bit surprising. Don't really think there's many final round games down in Tassie, but nonetheless, North Melbourne will be playing down there. In bottom spot right now against the Gold Coast Suns, who were pretty good against Carlton but couldn't get over the line. It will be an interesting game, I think, because I think the Gold Coast, I don't know if they've ever played. Oh, they would play down in Tassie a few times, but definitely wouldn't experience the cold that they would experience down there very often. And North Melbourne are pretty good down there. And actually did give a little bit of a test to Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, I think. So I give them a bit of a chance here, North Melbourne, to potentially win this one. However, I can't pick them. I can't pick them for the life of me. I think the Gold Coast, they'll be too good in the end. I think it'll be a pretty close one, but I think Gold Coast, just for the quality on the field right now, I think they'll be able to pull a victory out of that one. After that, we get to Hawthorn versus Fremantle at the MCG. Big game for both teams, I think, to finish off their year. Hawthorn have been pretty good the past few weeks. They won 2 games before losing that one against Melbourne, and even though they can't move on the ladder, I guess Fremantle could. I mean, they could fall, but, Fremantle can't go up. So, Fremantle don't really have much to play for. Neither do Hawthorn in a lot of ways. But I think Hawthorn will win this one because it's at the MCG. And also, I think they're in a bit better form than Fremantle, if I'm being honest with you. I think if Hawthorn can win it in the middle, which they have been able to for a lot of the season, I think they can get on top. The question is, can they get a good enough delivery inside the forward 50 against Fremantle's defence, which is very good? I don't know. But if they can, which I think they will be able to, I think that Hawthorn will win this one and finish off their season on a high. And I think, even though they are 16th, I think they've had a pretty successful year, Hawthorn. I think in the next couple of years, they could definitely be pushing for a potential finals berth. And, got to give Sam Mitchell credit. I think it'll be interesting. After that, though, we get to probably one of the biggest games of the round, which is Brisbane versus St Kilda. And the reason why I say this is one of the biggest games of the round is because both teams will want to get home finals, so both teams need to win this game. If it was at Marvel, I'd probably still be picking Brisbane, but I think St Kilda have a lot more of a chance. But because it's at the Gabba, I think Brisbane win this one all day. St Kilda, I still don't trust their forward line, even though they've won the past few weeks. I think that there's going to be a little bit of a exposed here again. They're going to get a little bit exposed here against Brisbane because I think Brisbane will be able to put on a really good score. We obviously saw them kick 19 goals against Collingwood on the weekend, and even though they kicked 100, they still won pretty well. So if St Kilda don't be really careful here and aren't really strong in defence, they're going to get beaten. I think beaten pretty well against Brisbane right here. I think St Kilda can hold up pretty well. They've actually been pretty good in the past few weeks. So I'll give them a bit of a chance not to get flogged, but I don't think that they have much of a chance here, and I think Brisbane will win and take home that home finals berth. Next up, we get to Geelong versus the Bulldogs, and the Bulldogs now have everything to play for. If they lose this game, finals is done. If they win, they take 8th spot for the night because their percentage is slightly better than the GWS Giants. So we will see how this one pans out. I think for the theatre, people would like to see the Bulldogs win this one. But I think for the game as a whole, how the season has panned out, I think the Giants deserve to be in the finals more than the Bulldogs, if I'm being honest. And I think down in Geelong, even though the Bulldogs have been okay down there at times, it's hard to pick against Geelong, even though they have been in pretty poor form for a while now, the Cats. I just think down there, they're going to be too good for the Bulldogs, and the only reason why I give the Bulldogs a slight chance here is because the Cats have really nothing to play for. They've had a failure of a year,
And I don't know if they would really care if they lose this last game. So that gives the Bulldogs a slight chance here, but I just think the Cats down there would probably want to give to their fans a little bit of an up, a little bit of a happy thought at the end of the season and try and win this game. Next up, though, we get to Optus Stadium, which is West Coast versus the Crows. And I don't give West Coast much of a chance here. We've seen West Coast be actually smashed at home quite regularly this season. And the Crows, I think, will want to bounce back from that performance against the Swans, because even though they, were robbed in the last moments, they weren't that good for 3 quarters. So I think they want to bounce back here, get a massive performance at the end of the season, and potentially give Taylor Walker a Coleman, because if he kicks a few goals, there could be a little bit of a late charge from him at the end of the Coleman race. And I think the Crows will win this one pretty convincingly. I don't really see much happening here for the West Coast Eagles. Even though it's at home, it doesn't really make much of a difference in my opinion. And even though the Crows haven't won many games away from home this year, again, I don't think it makes much of a difference. I think Crows just win this one and pretty comfortably. After that, we get to Sunday afternoon, 12 o'clock to start, is Port Adelaide versus Richmond. And Richmond, again, probably don't have a lot to play for here. But Port Adelaide have everything to play for. If Brisbane don't win, they can go for a finals berth here, Port Adelaide. And if they lose and Melbourne go and win, then potentially Port Adelaide fall down to 4th and we'll have Collingwood in the first round, which I know some people could say that isn't exactly a bad thing because Collingwood aren't in the best of form right now. But with a week off, I think Collingwood would get a few players back and be quite dangerous in round 1 of the finals. So I think you need to go in with winning form, and you don't want to exactly tank a game before the finals to see what happens. So I think Port Adelaide will be all guns blazing here. And again, if Brisbane do lose by some chance, then they can even unlock a second spot, Port Adelaide, and get that home final. So that means everything for them. I think Port Adelaide will win this one. They want to go with some winning form. Richmond kind of hit that wall now, and I know they beat North Melbourne, but they're basically the worst team in the comp at the moment, so not exactly a massive win for them. There are a couple of I think also that Richmond would have made all their, would have fired all their shots in that game against North to win for their champions. So I think Richmond will kind of put the cue on the rack here. Port Adelaide will win this one pretty comfortably, and we'll be going into the finals with a big win. Next up, we get to one of the biggest games of the round as well. A couple of big ones on Sunday. I like how they've had to set up the last round of the season later, so we actually will have some really big games at the end of the season. Melbourne versus Sydney. Now, I think Melbourne haven't been in the best of form, but they've been able to, tally those wins together, which is good. They've got Clayton Oliver back now, even though he didn't have a big game against Hawthorn. It's going to be a big one here for Sydney. Now, Callum Mills has been taking a little bit of a tagging role the past week or so, so we'll see if he goes to Oliver or Petrarca. Tom McCartan being out isn't exactly a huge loss against Melbourne because they don't really have a lot of key forwards to man up on. But I think Tom McCartan does keep them quite strong down there in defence for the Swans. And even though the Swans are in a rich vein of form with the 6 wins in a row, I just think that Melbourne win this one. I don't know really how much by. I think it will be a pretty close one because Sydney don't tend to win big ones at the moment unless it's against the West Coast Eagles. So I think it will be a close one. I think Melbourne need this win, to be honest, because they need to beat a good team. I think, they've kind of been able to track a couple of easy ones in the past month or so. So we'll see how that one pans out. I just think that Melbourne will be able to get, if they dominate the midfield, which a lot of teams have been able to do against Sydney this year, because it's on the SCG, they can dominate forward. So we'll see how that one pans out. I think Melbourne win this one in a close one, and potentially can get themselves to 3rd and get themselves against Brisbane in round 1 of the finals. But other than that, they can't really go too much further. Unless Brisbane and Port both lose, then they can get a home final because they've got the best percentage in the league at the moment. But other than that, I don't really know too much that Melbourne will be wanting to. They'll just be happy to go into the finals with a big win. And then finally, we get to a big game if the Bulldogs lose, which is Carlton versus the Giants. And if the Giants didn't lose those couple of games in a row against Sydney and then against Port Adelaide by a pretty big margin, the Giants would be one of the best informed teams in the comp. But unfortunately, they've lost a couple of games and, they smashed they basically had a week off against the Bombers, let's be real. So they're not exactly going to be battle-hardened against this game against Carlton. But Carlton, had a bit of a fumble last week. They didn't lose, but they almost lost. And sometimes you need that little bit of a scare just to get yourselves back on track. And we saw that with Port Adelaide a little bit. They were able to get themselves back on track with a loss against, with a close win against Essendon, but then they fell off. So it will be interesting for that 4-week period or so for Port Adelaide. So if Carlton could potentially go two ways here, they could fall off right here and then go into the finals with a week off with a loss, which I don't think helps them at all. I don't think having that loss there would help. But I think if they win this game, I think they go right into finals with a massive, opportunity. But also that week off really hurts these teams like Sydney, Carlton, and also Brisbane to an extent, because they're hitting the finals with the rich vein of form, which sometimes is okay. Like Sydney last year and Geelong, hit the ground running, but can also hurt teams. Because we saw Collingwood last year have a really rich vein of form going into finals, but then kind of fell off towards the end. So hitting that rich vein of form would be big. I think Carlton will win this one. It's hard to pick against them. I think they'll go 10 in a row now and hit that finals with a rich vein of form. And it's going to be hard to win outside the 8, but I think if any year is the year to do it, I think it could be this one. With a lot of teams hitting the finals with that form from outside the top 4. We've seen the Giants in some pretty good form lately. Sydney obviously been in that good form. Carlton probably been the best team in the comp for for a while. And even St Kilda have won 4 of their past 5. So even though that meaning it's the biggest opposition, you got to take those wins when they're there. So I think that's my tips done, guys, for round 24. And finally, for the podcast, we get to the AFL Fantasy segment. And if you guys remember last week, I mentioned that I was playing with my brother in AFL Fantasy, and I had a fucking shocker. I'm going to be honest, I had a shocker. I had Dyson Heppel. He didn't do very well. He only got 56. James Sicily didn't do enough. Doherty only got 80. Taranto is my vice, only got 89. Merritt 90, Sarong 80, Petrarca and Oliver 70 and 60, terrible. Kieran Briggs, he got 93, but Tim English, I just had to bring him in this year. I think it just had a point where I had to go for him and he just didn't work out. My forward lines did pretty well, all got hundreds except for Rosie with the 89, which is still pretty good. But I lost in the end by just over 200 points, and my brother will be in the grand final of that league, which is good for him. But yeah, I lost, and that's very disappointing, and I've been crying about it all day. But nonetheless, so obviously I'm not really playing for much in the AFL Fantasy at the end of the year. My rank is 6,000 now. I've really plummeted now. I'm just inside the top 7,000, which isn't the best if I'm being honest. So I've done my trades here. I got rid of Nankervis. He was basically the most amount of money on my bench, so I thought I might as well get rid of him. There's no point keeping him now. And I got Cheetahs, I believe that's his name, from the Gold Coast Suns, basically a 200 price player. Just get as much cash as I can get. And I got rid of Dyson Heppel for Jack Sinclair. Basically the only... I was almost at Nick Newman, but I just couldn't get enough for him, so... I got Jack Sinclair. He's been very good this year, and it'll be good to have him in the final round. Not really much to play for, though. So, at the end, at the end of the AFL fantasy season, probably a pretty par. I think I got 5,000 last year, so maybe it wasn't so par. But I had a really good start to it and just couldn't finish it, so it's pretty disappointing for me, to be honest. But my brother hopefully wins this week in the final game and wins, what is it, Brownie? Not even Brownie points, like Pride, I guess. Good on him for winning that game. Kudos to him. I didn't have the post in my game to win for my team for the Swans. My post wasn't there to call. I didn't have a goal umpire helping me for points. But anyway, that's unlucky for me. Nonetheless, guys, that is the end of the Boundary Riders podcast for, episode 25, I guess. This week, I wasn't able to get a stream. I'm sorry about that. And next week, I won't be able to do a stream either because the weekend will be the wedding weekend for me. So... I'm very happy that the Swans won. The big reason why I'm happy that the Swans won is because I won't really be watching the game on Sunday because, I'll be celebrating my wedding the day after. So I won't be really watching much of the Swans game, which is, a little bit hard for me. But, I'm glad now that we made the final, so we secured it. So I'm not really worried too much about it. If we lost that game, and I'd be, sitting here stressing my head off, if we make the finals, I'm not really going to be, that stressed out. And also, just quickly, just to the Crows fans out there, I don't think you have too much to worry about. I know you're not going to make the finals this year, which is, disappointing. But because you guys start with the pre-season a little bit earlier. I think you guys are, prime for finals next year as well. If you can bring in a couple of recruits in the off-season, bring some players that you guys need, build some depth, I think the Crows could be big next year and could be the real improvers. But yeah, guys, that's the end of the episode now. Hopefully your team wins this week. It's all from me, so we will catch you all next time.